Imagine yourself standing in a grand, drafty castle in the heart of a medieval winter, somewhere around 1350. The wind outside is howling like it's got a grudge against anything warm, rattling the small windows and creeping through every crack in the stone walls. There's no thermostat to crank up, no electric heater humming in the corner, and certainly no cozy central heating to wrap you in comfort. Yet somehow, the nobles who called these stone fortresses home didn't just survive the biting cold. They turned their chilly dwellings into havens of warmth using nothing but their wits, a few logs, and a whole lot of ingenuity. Welcome back to Boring History, where we dig into the past and make it anything but boring. Today, we're stepping into the great medieval freeze, a time when staying warm was a daily battle that required creativity, strategy, and a touch of flair. So, grab a hot drink, pull your chair closer to the fire, real or imaginary, and let's dive into a world where warmth was the ultimate luxury. Picture this. You're a noble in a sprawling castle, surrounded by icy fields and snow-dusted forests. The first thing you'd notice is the fireplace, and trust me, this isn't the charming little hearth you might be imagining from a modern cabin. These were massive, wood-devouring monsters that could burn through 150 logs in a single week, enough timber to build a small cabin, just to keep you warm for 7 days. These fireplaces weren't just a source of heat. They were the heart of the castle, the center of every important room. Forget fancy thrones or tapestries of your stern-faced ancestors. The fireplace was the real star. It was where everyone gathered, where stories were swapped, and where you'd huddle if you had any hope of not turning into a human popsicle. Servants, bless their frostbitten souls, would trek through the snow to gather armfuls of wood, their survival tied to keeping those fires roaring. Because without them, the castle was just a giant stone refrigerator. Now, don't get the idea that these fireplaces turned the castle into a tropical paradise. Far from it. Even with flames blazing high enough to singe your eyebrows, most of the castle stayed cold, cold enough to store ice cream, if anyone had thought to invent it yet. The heat clung stubbornly to the fireplace, refusing to spread out like a modern heater. It was like trying to warm your entire house with a single candle. So the nobles got clever. They played a constant game of chasing warmth, moving from one toasty spot to another, always staying close to the fire's glow. And here's where their ingenuity really kicked in. They didn't just rely on the flames themselves. They invented chimneys, which, believe it or not, were a game changer. Before chimneys, smoke would linger in the room like an unwelcome guest, forcing you to choose between freezing or choking. With chimneys, you could finally breathe and stay warm at the same time. It was practically revolutionary, like discovering fire all over again. The wealthiest nobles took things to another level. They didn't settle for one fireplace. They built what I like to call heat highways throughout their castles. Key rooms, like the Great Hall or the Lord's private chambers, were clustered around multiple fireplaces, creating pockets of warmth where you could actually relax. Less important rooms, like some drafty tower on the north side? Let's just say if someone invited you for a meeting there in January, they probably weren't your best friend. This was medieval multi-zone heating, long before thermostats were a twinkle in anyone's eye. Instead of flipping a switch, you had to convince a team of servants to haul wood up endless flights of stairs, day in and day out. And those fireplaces weren't just for warmth, they were social hubs, the medieval equivalent of a group chat. People would gather around, swapping gossip, complaining about the weather because some things never change, and soaking up every bit of heat they could. It was like a party where the main attraction was not freezing. But when the sun went down and it was time for bed, the real challenge began. You might think nobles would just grit their teeth and deal with the cold, but oh no, they weren't about to let a little thing like freezing temperatures ruin their beauty sleep. Their bedchambers were like the world's first luxury sleep spas, minus the aromatherapy but with an abundance of feathers. We're talking mattresses stuffed with the finest down, plucked from over 100 birds. These beds were so plush, it's no wonder nobles slept until noon. Getting into bed was a production, starting with woolen sleepwear that made you feel like you were wearing a sheep. Then came the blankets, not one, not two, but sometimes 7 layers of thick wool quilts. By the time you were tucked in, you'd probably burned enough calories to call it a workout. And just to make sure the bed was toasty before you climbed in, servants would slide a metal pan filled with hot coals between the sheets, a medieval hot water bottle. You just had to be careful not to roll over too fast, or you'd be playing a very warm version of The Floor is Lava. The crowning glory was the 4-poster bed, complete with heavy curtains that weren't just for show. These were like medieval sleeping bags, trapping warmth and muffling the sound of your chattering teeth. And let's talk about the carpets for a second. These weren't your average rugs, they were serious investments, often imported from distant lands. Stepping onto a cold stone floor first thing in the morning was a non-starter. So these thick, luxurious carpets acted like the medieval version of heated flooring, keeping your feet cozy. Even the animals got in on the action. Cats, those adorable little heat machines, would curl up by the hearth or on your lap, purring away like living hot water bottles. Some nobles went even further, bringing livestock like cows or sheep indoors during the winter. A single cow could raise the room's temperature by 5 to 10 degrees, making them the ultimate portable heaters, even if they came with a bit of mooing. Don't worry, they weren't wandering through the dining hall. These animals had their own designated spots, but it's still wild to think about sharing your castle with a cow. And then there was the clothing. Medieval nobles didn't just throw on a jacket and call it a day. They turned layering into an art form. It started with linen undergarments, designed to trap a thin layer of air close to the skin, like the medieval version of thermal underwear. Over that went woolen tunics and gowns, made from the finest sheep's wool, sometimes from 5 whole sheep for a single outfit. These weren't your itchy, off-the-rack sweaters. They were so well-crafted that some are still displayed in museums today. The real showstoppers were the outer layers, fur-lined cloaks and velvet gowns that would make any modern fashionista jealous. These cloaks were like walking blankets, lined with fox or marten fur to create a personal bubble of warmth. The tailors were like thermal engineers, stitching garments to fit tightly in some places and loosely in others, creating air pockets that trapped warm air. Add in fur-lined gloves, wool-padded boots, and hoods that put modern hoodies to shame, and you had an outfit ready for an Arctic expedition, or at least a very chilly castle. It's incredible to think about how every detail, from the fireplaces to the bedding to the clothes, was part of a carefully crafted system to outsmart the cold. Now, let's step outside the bedchamber and look at the castle itself, because the architecture was doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to keeping warm. Those massive stone walls, sometimes 12 feet thick, imagine 2 tall people stacked on top of each other, weren't just for keeping out invaders. They were like giant thermal batteries, soaking up heat during the day and slowly releasing it at night. Builders didn't just grab any old rocks. They chose dense stones with high thermal mass, capable of holding onto warmth like a miser holds onto gold. In the summer, these walls would absorb the sun's rays and keep the castle cool. But in winter, they'd capture every bit of heat from the fireplaces and radiate it back into the rooms. It was like having a natural thermostat, no fancy gadgets required. And the windows? Forget floor-to-ceiling glass, those hadn't been invented yet. Instead, windows were small, often no bigger than arrow slits, and carefully placed on south-facing walls to catch as much sunlight as possible. They were like medieval solar panels, letting in warmth without letting out too much heat. The real genius of these windows was their design. They were angled, narrower on the outside and wider on the inside, so less cold air could sneak in, but sunlight could spread out once it entered, like a spotlight warming up a room. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder how they figured it out without modern science. The roofs were just as clever. Most castles had thatched roofs, made from layers of straw or reeds packed so tightly you could barely poke a finger through. These weren't just cheap, they were brilliant at insulation, trapping warm air inside and keeping cold air out. In the summer, they'd deflect heat. In winter, they'd hold onto warmth like a giant blanket for the whole castle. And when it rained or snowed, the water would slide right off, keeping everything dry. A well-made thatched roof could last up to 60 years, longer than some modern roofs, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. But staying warm wasn't just about the building itself, it was about how people used it. Winter was party season in the medieval castle, and I don't mean just for fun. The Great Hall would come alive with dozens of people, all generating heat like human light bulbs. A single person gives off about as much heat as a 100-watt bulb, so pack 50 or 60 people into a room, and you've got a serious heating system. Nobles would host massive feasts that lasted for hours, with roaring fires, hot food, and plenty of dancing to keep the blood flowing. It was like a medieval gym session, except instead of treadmills, you had jigs in 7 layers of wool. These gatherings were planned with warmth in mind. Important meetings were scheduled for the coldest months, and grand feasts could stretch over days in January. Being a social butterfly wasn't just about status. It was about survival. Musicians played, storytellers spun tales, and everyone laughed a bit louder than necessary, because movement meant heat. A heated debate about politics or the neighbor's tacky new tapestry could warm a room faster than any fireplace. The kitchens were another secret weapon. Those long simmering stews and soups weren't just delicious. They kept the fire burning for hours, turning the kitchen into a toasty oasis. Servants would sneak in to thaw their frozen fingers, and even nobles would find excuses to linger near the hearth, where hot stones from the fire were used to warm wine or ale. It was like the world's first heated beverage program, and let me tell you, there's nothing like a warm tankard to make a winter's day feel a little less brutal. For the wealthiest nobles, there was an even fancier solution: the hypocaust. This was like medieval underfloor heating, with a furnace heating air that circulated through hollow spaces under the floors and sometimes inside the walls. Imagine walking across warm tiles in the dead of winter. Pretty luxurious, right? Of course, it took a small army of servants to keep the furnace stoked and clear out soot. But for those who could afford it, it was like having heated car seats in a world of wooden benches. What's so fascinating about all this is how it all worked together. The walls, the windows, the roofs, the feasts, the kitchens. Every piece of the puzzle was designed to squeeze every last drop of warmth out of a harsh winter. It wasn't just about throwing more logs on the fire. It was about thinking strategically, using every resource available, and turning survival into something almost elegant. Let's zoom in now on the daily grind of staying warm, because this wasn't just about big systems. It was about the little details that made life in a medieval castle bearable. Imagine waking up in your feather-stuffed bed. The room's still chilly despite the fire that's been burning all night. Your first move? Get to the fireplace. You'd warm your hands and face before braving the rest of the castle, because every step away from the hearth was a step into the cold. Breakfast wasn't just about food, it was about hot food, served straight from the kitchen's ever-burning fires. A steaming bowl of porridge or a warm drink could take the edge off even the frostiest morning. And nobles didn't just eat and run. They lingered, soaking up the heat and the company, because every moment near the fire was a moment of comfort. The servants were the backbone of this whole operation, running a marathon of heat-generating tasks. Hauling wood was a full-time job, hundreds of logs a week, dragged through snow and ice. Then there was the kitchen work, stirring pots, tending fires, moving hot stones to warm beds or drinks. Every task kept them moving, which kept them warm, but it also kept the castle running. Furniture played a role too. Chairs and benches were placed strategically near the fireplaces, creating little islands of warmth. Tapestries on the walls weren't just pretty. They acted like insulation, trapping heat and softening the chill of the stone. Some nobles even used portable screens to create makeshift cocoons of warmth around their chairs, like building a fort for grown adults who just wanted to stay toasty. Animals were part of the daily rhythm, too. Cats followed the nobles from room to room, always seeking the warmest spots. Dogs, hunting hounds or lapdogs, were just as good at doubling as furry heaters. Livestock, kept in their designated areas, added a constant low-level warmth to the castle's lower levels. It sounds strange now, but when you're facing a winter that feels like it's trying to freeze you solid, you take all the help you can get. Clothing, as we've mentioned, was a daily ritual. Getting dressed was like suiting up for battle, with each layer carefully chosen for warmth and versatility. Linen undergarments trapped air close to the skin, woolen tunics added heft, and fur-lined cloaks brought the luxury. Even the accessories, gloves, boots, hoods were padded or lined to keep the cold at bay. It was like wearing a portable heater, and it looked good, too. Social customs were designed with warmth in mind, even for smaller gatherings. A group of nobles sitting around a fire, playing chess or sharing stories, was cooling their body heat. Corridors were narrow to minimize drafts, and rooms were arranged to keep the warmest spaces accessible. If you had to venture to a colder part of the castle, you'd bundle up and move fast, like a modern commuter in a snowstorm. The kitchens, as always, were a haven of warmth. The constant fires and steaming pots made them feel like a medieval spa, minus the cucumbers and plus a lot of onions. Hot stones were sometimes wrapped in cloth and carried to other rooms, like portable heaters. And for the elite, the hypocaust system made every step a warm one, with heat radiating up from the floors. It was a lot of work to maintain, but it was the ultimate medieval flex. What ties all this together is the sheer creativity of it all. Every detail, from the placement of a chair to the stitching of a cloak, was part of a larger system to outsmart the cold. It's a testament to human resilience, and it's why this story is so worth telling. So here we are at the end of our journey through the medieval world, and what a ride it's been. This isn't just a story about fireplaces and fur cloaks. It's about human ingenuity, about finding ways to thrive in a world that was anything but welcoming. The nobles of the Middle Ages didn't have our modern comforts, but they didn't need them. They had a deep understanding of their environment and a knack for making the most of it. Their castles, with those thick stone walls, small windows, and thatched roofs, were built to trap and hold heat like giant batteries. The fireplaces, the heart of the castle, brought people together, turning survival into a social event. The clothing, from linen undergarments to velvet gowns, was engineered to keep them warm while looking fabulous. Animals, feasts, and kitchens added layers of warmth, both literal and figurative, making the castle a place of community as well as comfort. And for the wealthiest, the hypocaust system was the cherry on top, proving that medieval luxury could rival anything we have today. What's so inspiring about this is how it shows the human spirit at work. These nobles looked at their world, freezing winters, stone walls, limited resources, and said, "We can do better." And they did. They built systems, developed strategies, and created a lifestyle that was warm, comfortable, and even a little glamorous. It's a reminder that ingenuity doesn't need fancy technology. It just needs creativity and determination. The next time you're curled up under a blanket, sipping something warm, think about those medieval nobles. They didn't have it easy, but they made it work, turning their castles into fortresses of warmth against a brutal winter. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the great medieval freeze. If you loved this journey into the past, hit that like button, subscribe to Boring History, and drop a comment below to let me know what you thought or what you'd like us to explore next. Maybe you're curious about medieval food, castles, or another quirky slice of history. Let me know. Until next time, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next video.